Russian soldiers were getting ready for one of their most audacious attacks. Inside occupied Kherson to date at 6:28 local time, at Jartayskoye Air Base, two Russian helicopters were parked on the tarmac. Their crews are completing the standard pre-flight inspections. In the meantime, a Russian Special Forces diving team and a tugboat were loading special goods at Sylvester Harbor. Even though the morning had been peaceful thus far, everything would change in precisely 4 minutes. 12 Ukrainian drones fired from seafaring vessels were already speeding toward their targets at 140 kilometers per hour. But the Russian operators were unaware of this. Fortunately for Ukraine, these garage-built drones had one important benefit. But first, they had to make it through a fortuitous meeting that nearly put an end to everything before it started. While conducting a routine patrol, a Russian Raptor patrol boat abruptly opened fire into the pre-dawn darkness. Its 14.5 heavy machine gun pounded the ocean with its shadows. 3 heat signatures were seen by the gunner speeding at 35 knots in the direction of Crimea. For aerial drones are carried by Ukrainian USVs on waterproof launch rails. The black sky was illuminated by tracer rounds, special bullets that glow to help gunners better guide the fire. As it got closer, the Raptor's engines roared as it sped to 48 knots. With a maximum speed of 35 knots, open ocean everywhere, and nowhere to shelter, the USVs were trapped. With each burst, the Russian gunner moved his fire closer, hitting the fleeing drones only a few meters away. The lead USV abruptly made a sharp right turn in the direction of the shallow reefs close to Cape Conius. The patrol boat had to decide because the other two were divided. The depth finder on the Raptor began to scream to 0.5 meters to 0.0, 1.8. The captain was aware of these waters, which are 1 meter deeper and cut through volcanic rock. He jammed the brakes into reverse. The USVs started the emergency drone release at precisely 1,800 meters from the Raptor. The launch rails broke vertically. At the same time, 12 drones shot aloft at a speed of 50 meters per second. The Russian gunner struck his mount stops while attempting to pursue them. 60 is the maximum elevation. The drones had already reached 75. $1 million armament system had just been vanquished by simple geometry. A toothless Raptor, however, was the least of the drone's concerns. When Russian electronic warfare began, the drones were functioning normally. The Tarkinku Peninsula was the starting point for the Romanbian system. Imagine someone activating a 400 kilowatts radio jammer that obstructs all possible frequencies. 1/10 of a watt is produced by your Wi-Fi router. The entire electromagnetic spectrum is essentially rendered stagnant by this device. However, things worsened. Not only were the Russians obstructing GPS, but they were also feeding it misleading data. The drones were 15 kilometers away from their actual location on the navigation screen. The drones would fly directly into an empty ocean if they kept using those coordinates. The Ukrainian operatives were ready for this. They began using inertial navigation instead. Without the need for external signals, the drone's internal gyroscopes track movement. Imagine closing your eyes while you stroll around your home. You can count steps and recall where the turns are, so you don't need to see. At a height of 2,000 meters, the drones assembled. The horizon is already being scanned by their cameras. 20 kilometers to the southwest was Sylvester Harbor. The Gavardoy Air Base was located 35 kilometers to the south. The parameters of the mission were well defined. The naval base would be attacked by one squad. The airfield would be hit by the other. In order to avoid alarm signals breaking the surprise, both targets have to be hit simultaneously. The 12 drones were divided into 2 groups as the patrol boat opened fire on the fleeing USVs, which were now vanishing into international waters. 6 made their way inland to the aviation base. 4 made their way down to the harbor as communications relays to stay at altitude. The Ukrainian coast was being painted gold by the rising sun. It would be the ideal cover for the subsequent events. For drones descended towards Sylvester Harbor at 6:17 through morning fog. The naval base was equipped with radar arrays, Panzer missile systems, fortifications, and hundreds of sailors keeping watch. However, there was one benefit to the drones. Nobody anticipates a bicycle-speed onslaught. The drones were instantly locked upon by the Panzer S-1 system. At 20 kilometers, this device can track a tennis ball. The system's computer repeatedly rejected these drones, even though they ought to have been simple prey. Cruise missiles roaring in at 300 meters per second were intended to be intercepted by the Panzer. These drones were traveling at a speed of 11 meters per second. It was practically unbelievable to the tracking algorithm that something would intentionally fly that slowly. It resembles a speed trap that disregards vehicles traveling at less than 20 miles per hour. The program believes it must be garbage or a bird. Big error. The drones maneuver between anchored vessels at a height of 10 meters. Radar waves cancel each other out at this height by bouncing off the sea. It is the same physics that causes your phone to drop calls in some areas. Perfect radar shadows were produced by the patrol boat's enormous steel hulls. The first person to notice them was a sharp-eyed sailor who yelled and pointed. Manual optical tracking, which is essentially an extremely large camera system, was used by the Panzer operator. However, visibility was reduced to 800 meters due to morning fog. To determine a firing solution, the system required 3 seconds of constant tracking. Every 2 seconds, the drones would never provide the computer with enough information. It's similar to attempting to capture a hummingbird with a camera. It's gone by the time you lock on. A Bug 2190 tugboat that was their target was moored at Pier 7. The staff is checking the equipment in the morning. This wasn't your typical harbor workhorse. It assisted Russia's Undersea Special Forces, or PDSS. These combat divers trained with equipment valued at millions of dollars for years. The tugboat had underwater propulsion vehicles, diving chambers, and enough demolition tools to sink a destroyer. Eliminating it was the first step in a 2-pronged assault against the impending Russian Special Forces operation. They had to remove their helicopters as well. They might swiftly obtain additional resources for their goal if even one attack were unsuccessful. This meant that no matter what, the helicopters and the tug had to go down. At 400 meters, the sailors operating the DSHK heavy machine gun on the tugboat saw the approaching drones. The mount only rose to 60 as the weapon roared to life, unleashing projectiles the size of human thumbs at 850 meters per second. The lead drone came almost directly overhead. It presented a target area of precisely 0.09 square meters, or roughly the size of a large pizza. When diving in an 80 angle, the problem with human reaction times is this. Pulling a trigger after seeing something takes to 150 milliseconds. In 1/4 second, the drone covered 14 meters at 200 kilometers per hour. The gunman's rounds consistently lagged behind reality, as if he were shooting in after pictures. From various compass points, the other 3 drones came in low. The cannon took 6 complete seconds to complete a 180-degree spin. And when you're being attacked, 6 seconds seems like a lifetime. At 140 kilometers per hour, the first drone crashed into the bridge windows. A jet of molten metal traveling at 8,000 meters per second was produced by its shaped charge. A copper cone covered with 3 kilograms of explosives. Glass and steel were punched through as if they were paper. In an instant, smoke and flames filled the bridge. The second drone struck the water line exactly. Water pressure through a meter-wide hole is equivalent to 1.1 atmospheres at a depth of 1 meter, or roughly 16 pounds per square inch. About 33,000 gallons are forced in per minute by that pressure. The tugboat listed 20 degrees to port right away. Millions of dollars worth of diving gear slid across the deck and hit the bay. For the morning trip, the PDSS crew had begun preparing their equipment, very likely underwater surveillance of the coastline defenses of Ukraine. They were now witnessing it all sink. Classified communications equipment, underwater explosive charges, and priceless specialized diving equipment all sank to the muddy bottom of Silvestol in approximately 30 seconds. The Black Sea Fleet's elite divers' entire special operations capabilities were destroyed. However, this was only the initial blow. Unaware that the welcome wagon was approaching, 6 more drones continued to race toward Gavard, the Skoa Air Base, where helicopter workers were beginning their pre-flight checks. The 6 drones that were getting close to Gavard Skoya had traveled 35 kilometers inland. While using up 60% of their batteries, they use morning commuter traffic as cover to follow the roadway at a height of 3 meters. The drone traces vanished and the radar scatter each time a truck passed beneath. At 140 kilometers per hour, they were threading the needle between bridge overpasses, road signs, and power wires. They arrived at the perimeter of the air base at 06:01. The base has toward aimed the system as a $25 million mobile surface-to-air missile launcher. At 15 kilometers, they should have been engaged. However, the tour has a hidden flaw that no one discusses. The tour's radar doesn't scan the entire area at once. It sweeps in bands of elevation. Aircraft are scanned at high altitude, helicopters at medium altitude, and cruise missiles at low altitude. It takes for seconds to complete the cycle. Repeat: high scan, medium scan, low scan. It resembles an up and down surveillance camera. Everywhere, it isn't looking right now. There is a blind spot. This was precisely timed by the drone operators. As they waited for the precise moment the Tower S beam would sweep upward. To check for high-altitude threats, they kept an eye on their synchronized chronometers. The radar beam slanted up to skin above 500 meters at 06:01 and 14 seconds. The drones had a 4-second opportunity to cross for 100 meters of open space when they were only 3 meters above the ground. The Taurus radar painted an empty sky above them as they raced across the perimeter. At their top speed of 180 kilometers per hour, the drones had reached the base's own structures by the time the beam swept back down to low altitude at 6:21 and 18 seconds. The tour operators witnessed them briefly flicker across the screen before vanishing behind the radar shadows of maintenance facilities and hangars. In an attempt to retrieve the targets, the operator hurriedly switched to the manual sector scan. However, the drones were now navigating between buildings inside the base's perimeter. Each structure produced a blind radar spot. The tour's view was obstructed by every parked car, fuel tank, and aircraft shelter. Police helicopters are unable to locate a person fleeing across a crowded city for the same reason. The sensor image is being broken up by too many impediments. The drones traveled 3 meters above the high-voltage power lines. As they approached the flight line, the 110,000 volts carried by the cables produce an electromagnetic field that buzzes at 50 Hz. Drone motors' tiny electrical signatures are muffled by it. They appear as power line interference on radar displays, which the type operators see and disregard daily. At 2 million candelas, the morning light was low in the eastern sky. That is 20 times brighter than high-beam automobile headlights. Every camera, optical sensor, and human sight pointing eastward was totally overpowered. The drones came straight from this burning blind hole. A traditional fighter pilot tactic, modified for the drone era, is attacking from the sun. However, the sound of whining engines cannot be muffled by illumination. The first person to notice them was a perimeter guard who yelled into his radio. 3 soldiers with a GLA-S portable missile launchers bolted from the ready room. One of Russia's top manpads, or portable air defense systems, is the 9K338 GLA-S. From a distance of 6 kilometers, it can lock onto a fighter jet and pursue it through nearly any evasive maneuver. These drones ought to have been sitting ducks. Here's the issue, though. Heat is tracked by the ILGA. Although electric drones hardly generate any, the motors of a commercial drone barely warm up to a laptop computer's temperature. To track, the ILGA requires something really hot, such as a jet engine operating at 600. It's similar to attempting to ignite a match from a great distance. Using argon gas, the missile seeker head supercools to -200°C. It is capable of detecting temperature variations of 1/10 of a degree at the temperature. However, the drones were taking off directly from the rising sun. The infrared sensors were fully saturated by solar light at 1,000 watts per square meter. It is comparable to shining a flashlight through night vision goggles. Everything simply becomes white. One soldier made an effort to think beyond the box. He changed the launch mode to manual, in essence, firing blind and relying on the proximity fuse of the missile to accomplish the trick. With its proximity fuse set to explode within 1.5 meters of any target, the Iglis streaked off at Mach 2. However, the drone's cross-section was only 0.009 square meters, or around the size of a dinner plate on edge, with a few feet to spare on either side. The missile threaded between the two drones. Nothing worth blowing up was ever identified by the fuse. There is another issue with the Iglis. Minimum range of engagement. To arm its warhead, the missile requires 500 meters, a safety measure to keep the gunman safe. The drones were rapidly approaching and were already at 450 meters. Despite the soldiers' desperate attempts to reload, each launch tube weighs 18 pounds. The 6 drones spread out around the airfield after blowing past the missile squads. By comparing what they observed with previously stored photos, their crude cameras began to match patterns in extended, frantic spurts. Each weapon spits out 650 bullets every minute. However, firing a machine gun at a small drone is like attempting to shoot a fly with a pistol while on a roller coaster. However, the firearms weren't the issue. PKMs are quite good machine guns. Physics and human psychology were the issues. Gunners practice on predictable targets during training. A cardboard silhouette traveling on tracks at a steady speed. You pick up the beat, view the objective, compute the lead, squeeze the trigger. However, those drones were performing a lethal jazz solo on the spot. Reach a speed of 140 kilometers per hour. 40. Climb 10 meters. Dive. Roll a barrel. Repeat at random. Ghosts were constantly being shot at by the gunners. 2 heartbeats ago, the drone was firing where it was. The account was told by the tracers. The morning sky is filled with streaks of light chasing shadows. Always too late, always behind. 6 drones, and for gunmen, that math could be done by anyone. 2 or more would pass through unharmed. Everything is different when you know you will fail. Your hands tremble more. You squander communication on shots that can't be deflected. You second-guess each outburst. You become foolish when you are afraid. You get scared of math. Abruptly, 2 drones ascended high and flew straight forward. A pop-up technique meant to attract fire. Engage the easy target is the cry of every military impulse and training hour. It is irresistible, for machine guns tracked the obvious threats as they swung higher. There were, for other drones dispersed at various elevations, traditional deception. Check this out. The gunners were able to hit the drones, but the big attack is coming from there. One shot through its battery pack, plummeting downward and leaving sparks and white smoke in its wake. Another lost half of its propellers and began to wobble, but it had enough control to keep moving ahead on momentum until it collided with the earth. For survive unharmed. The results of the calculations were exactly what was expected. The first drone struck the Mi-24's cockpit canopy at 140 kilometers per hour, around 06 to 8. The helicopter was empty and chilly. When the base alarm began to sound, its staff had already left. A 3-kilometer-long shaped charge exploded upon collision. The explosion produced a jet of molten copper that was hot enough to evaporate steel and was traveling at 8,000 meters per second. It punched through seat armor, instrument panels, and bulletproof glass as if they were cardboard. The hydraulic pipes beneath the cockpit floor were discovered by the copper jet at 210 C. Hydraulic fluid ignites. The temperature of the copper was 3,000. In a matter of seconds, the flash fire found the 33mm cannon's ammunition belts inside the helicopter. The round began to randomly fire in all directions as it cooked off under the heat. The auxiliary fuel tank of the Mi-8 was struck by the second drone. Fuel used in aircraft is not the same as that used in cars. JP-8 burns at temperatures above 2000 Celsius and has a flash point of only 38 C. 500L leaked onto the heated asphalt and spread beneath the Mi-24, which was already on fire. The attack helicopter's primary fuel tanks were heated above auto ignition by the fire pole. In under 43 minutes, Ukraine's Ghost unit ruined whatever mission Russia had scheduled for that morning. Wrecked a helicopters valued at $32 million, and sank a special forces support vessel carrying priceless equipment, most likely causing chaos behind Ukrainian lines or sabotaging Ukrainian infrastructure. It wasn't just another successful attack. It demonstrated that the Whole Foods version could be defeated at any time and location with a great value brand weapon. For more amazing tales and little-known historical incidents, please subscribe to my channel, WW to Revealed, if you like this video.